And you know what? No
Exactly.
one understands me. Okay, yeah, I drink at all hours of the day, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm destructive. Yeah, I need therapy, but, like,
But it's, like, so cute, you know?
it's, like, cool, you know?
It's so, like, neat. I've never had an original thought in my life, but, like, I think you are
That's all I
maybe
have.
the most interesting person I've ever met.
Hi, I'm Lemon Lime.
And I'm Joelle. I forgot my name.
And we're
The
the ghouls
ghouls
next
next
door
door.
of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah,
And happy February. We made it.
because that's when it is.
Yep. It's
Yep.
February, and we're in our Tainted Love
Yeah.
series. Previously, we had a Romance Gone Wrong, which is not as fun of a title as Tainted Love. And I take a lot of pride in
In our
naming our
title,
series.
Gabe does, like, spearhead our naming.
So many things.
Yeah.
I am to blame for the natty disasters, and I still
That
think
was
about it
such a
fondly.
great
I still think about it fondly all the time.
Yeah.
So, for people listening, we are the Ghouls Next Door, a media literacy show from a horror lens where we explore the real life, historical, and psychological reasonings behind our cinematic fears. And today, the fear is commitment. The fear is two flawed beings not ever hearing each other
Yeah.
and therefore not having a good relationship. It breaks up, it comes back. You've been there.
Yeah.
We know those toxic
It's
couples.
literally like, Gen X should get therapy, a
Yeah.
movie,
The movie,
uh,
yeah.
like
Talk
a
about your feelings.
documentary even
Yes.
of, like, any Gen X relationship, that I've personally witnessed in my life,
Oh no.
just go horribly wrong. In that no one says how they feel about anything ever, and when they do, it always comes out super mean.
Mhm.
Like, it's not, like, honesty. It is just like, "Oh, wow, that was really rude. You coulda said that differently."
Such a
Um,
Joel is such a Scorpio, like straight up. Straight up. It yeah, I so we watched Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind
if you couldn't guess
as
so
yeah,
far.
as adults.
Mhm.
And because everyone's seen it, I feel like. But seeing it in new eyes and actually being able to understand what's going on and also having lived lives where maybe you wanted to forget someone, especially
Yeah.
when it's fresh, when you first get out of a relationship and you're like, this is the absolute worst thing that I've ever gone through today. And I don't
Yeah.
want it. I don't want this. It hurts and it super does.
Yeah, and it
And
can mess with
so,
your
yeah.
mind. There's actual science behind that. It really, just like anything else, it really depends on, like, who you are, what kind of support
Hmm.
systems you got in your life, how you deal with change, and if that messes with your brain.
Yeah.
But it can traumatize you in a real and visceral way that messes with your entire brain chemistry. Fun fact.
Yeah, which we will get into. And in our Tainted Love series, we are going to be covering things that aren't explicitly horror,
Mhm.
because sometimes love itself is horror. Just like, and I think having your memories ripped from you, even like if you were consenting at first, like his safe word never gets hurt. Right, like he is trying
Yeah.
to say no that whole time, and that's really scary, and losing chunks of your life can be really scary. Confronting your flaws and having someone shout them at you is horrifying. So I think it fits. Like it
Yeah.
works.
The
And we're
premise
gonna
itself, definitely super scary.
mhm,
And yeah, just like as you said, Gabe, there's just so much not consent taking place in that process. And when it's so readily accessible like that, you're taking like a really big decision and making like both characters kind of make it on a whim without much consultation. They're like, we saw you today, come tomorrow. We're
mhm.
gonna race your brain. There's no like let's see if you're okay
Yeah.
first or after. Like, there's really little medical intervention that takes place before they do this like really invasive and personal procedure. So definitely horror.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, this Lacuna is definitely preying on vulnerable people for this procedure. Like, we don't even know how much it is, but it's clearly like these are people who are in these rough situations. And if you're at that point where you're not really making like
Yeah.
sound decisions because it's all emotionally based, you're going to end up with some people who are regretting it the whole time. And we see that there's really gross abuse of this power as well taking place. Like there's a villain, like besides just Lacuna, the organization is
Mhm.
a villain. But Patrick slash Frodo, he is the worst. It's
An
so
entire
terrifying.
problem. Yeah.
Um, Same
He's
thing
a
with the
predator
doctor
and
as well.
he
Yeah,
just kinda
yeah,
takes advantage of his position.
yeah. I
And
think what's
clearly was
really
not vetted very
yeah,
much in the hiring process, but it is what it is.
yeah. I think also he like nobody in this film is good. Right?
Mm-mm.
Like, no one's a good person.
No,
Um, None of them, right?
not a
And I think
single
that's,
one.
like, really interesting. I think usually that's a big turn off for me if I can't find at least one character to, like, care about, but even though they weren't good people, I still cared about them. Like, they all do really horrible things or say really horrible things. Like, even the friends, like the fact that they gave him that card problem, they clearly had a relationship problem, like his
Yeah.
friends. Yeah, there's just like a lot, like every single character you learn about, except for like the wife of the doctor.
Mhm.
Say the only one. It was just like, ugh,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know?
yeah, they're, like, very human in a way that you kinda wish they were, like, slightly better, but, you do still, like, care kinda about
Mhm.
what's happening to some of them, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, if you haven't seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, get out of that rock. Get out from under there. Go watch it. It is I think cinematically, it is a fun film. I think it was really interesting to make. There are some pretty funny parts as well. And I think Jim Carrey did a great job. Kate Winslet also a great job.
Yeah.
And the story is like it's an emotional thing. There's a lot. It's a roller coaster, and I do really I would love to know what like a Gen Z person thinks
Version? Oh, yeah.
of this. Like I want to hear like, if they're Gen Z and you've watched
Yeah.
this film, email us thegoalsnextdoor@gmail.com and tell me what your thoughts are. I really
Yeah.
want to like generation of like therapy is totally cool. I want to know what they
Yeah.
think.
There's also, like, I wanna know, like, people who watched it when we did, like, in the early 2000s, when our brains were developing and not fully within our healing journey even, like, we were
Hmm.
younger when we watched this film for the
Yeah,
first time, at least, like, it was in the early 2000s this came out.
yeah,
Uh, so watch it again as a whole adult and let us know if you still like it as much. And it's
yeah.
cool if you do, I mean, I'm not the only one who has opinions.
Yeah, and
Uh,
if it's, one of your favorite films or whatever, let me know too.
yeah.
It'll be interesting to hear. I don't I think I would actually need to watch it again. I was like, I don't know. I'm still piecing together my feelings.
Yeah.
Um, but when I
Do
hop in
it.
to tell you about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which was from 2004, all
Oof.
those all those years ago. What a time period that was for me in my life. So, so it is about when their relationship turns sour, a couple undergoes a medical procedure to have each other erased from their memories forever, and is directed by Michel Gondry. And yeah, it is boring boy meets quirky girl, and he loves her spontaneity, and she
Mhm.
loves how he loves her.
Yeah.
But when quirky girl is revealed to actually be impulsive and reckless girl, and boring boy is actually mean and judgmental boy, they break up. And he,
Classic.
we've all been there.
Mhm.
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is an incredibly creative exploration of memory and relationships, and how much of love is the memories built together and our raw feelings for one another. It kind of explores, where the line is between those things. And in creating this script, screenwriter Michel Gondry said, "Soon I had a completely different idea of how I should do Eternal Sunshine. It became about memories, how we are our memories, and how our memories affect our lives. Losing them before you die is tragic." So definitely understanding the importance of preserving your memories. But also, I mean, trauma just straight up erases those
Mhm.
sometimes. So this is kind of like you're forcing trauma to do that, which is kind of interesting. The
Yeah.
film follows Joel and Clementine, an unlikely pair in the midst of a recoupling, a fiery breakup, and their very beginning. And while
Mhm.
mourning his breakup, Joel is informed that his impulsive ex girlfriend went through a procedure to erase him from her memories and to forget him and their life together. And Joel decides, in a moment of his own anguish and despair, to get the procedure himself. Um, so this like it's told out of order, which is really fun. Because when you first see them, you don't realize it's the second time they
Mhm.
meet. So, and then we get to kind of like go backwards and watch how they fell apart, and then we watch how they fell in love, and it's
Yeah.
just a really fun kind of backtracking and just showcase of relationships, which is kind of like it really did remind me a lot of 500 Days of Summer and that approach of like the moving in time where it's just like this day, and it's like
Mhm.
a early day where it's like cute and they do these things and they're in love, and then it's like a later day and it's like those same things that we do. Now there's this different tone, there's a different color theme. Like when we first see Joel, it's all blue, and as soon as
Mhm.
Clementine comes into his life, now it's
Color
bright and
returns, yeah.
yeah, colors here, it's a bright time. She is representing this opportunity for happiness for him. And so in a lot of times, in a lot of ways, Eternal Sunshine of Spotless Mind is a twisted version of the rom com. Because it shows us what happens after the meet cute, after they go through the initial struggles to be together. Now they're together. What happens, like post happily ever after?
Yeah.
And the film shows us the flaws in the character tropes that we've come to find cozy. And years before the term was coined, Clementine dismantles the manic pixie dream girl idea. Nathan Rabin, who initially kind of described this trope, described it as a bubbly, shallow cinematic creature that exists solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries and adventures.
Mhm.
We see those in what you would imagine uh, Zoe Deschanel's character would be in 500 Days of Summer, although she isn't. Um,
Mhm.
you see that in John Green's teen reads. You see that in Elizabethtown, Kirsten Dunst,
Mhm.
um, and Zoe Deschanel a lot,
Yeah.
like a lot, poor thing. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's definitely like a trope that happened. It just wasn't labeled before, like by the time Clementine was out. But
Yeah.
she is like actively like personifying and also dismantling it, which is really interesting. Like I think of her hair color changing as like Scott Pilgrim, like how he
Yeah.
remarks every time she changes her hair, and I'm just like, it's nothing to do with you, but she's so quirky.
Mhm.
And those first glimpses of Clementine feel much like the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. She wears bright sweaters and she changes her hair and she's loud and attention seeking, just what Joel needs as he muses to himself about how bored he is, and how maybe, he's missing out on life.
Mhm.
He kind of explains, like, oh, I'm very boring. Like, look at my journal. There's nothing in here. And she just asks, like, how does that make you feel? Like, I am anxious that I'm not doing everything I should be doing with my life at all times.
Mhm.
And that is something that he just like never verbalized. So
Yeah.
it's definitely something that he needed. And so that's kind of where the Manic Pixie Dream Girl comes from, is this idea that like she's just this force that propels him into a better place. And she's just this tool for his betterment. And
Mhm.
just this like, she could be quirky and weird and dance in the rain. And so now he can let loose a little and not be as,
Yeah.
he could along came Polly himself.
Yeah.
Um
There's so many movies that do it.
I'm like, they're all coming. Complaining that he complains about how sand is overrated, it's just small rocks,
Yep.
and Valentine's Day was made to sell candy and make people feel really bad about themselves. He's just musing the whole time. He's just like, I'm miserable.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, she's got a nice sweater. It's so bright. What a crazy sweater. um, I'm sad.
Yeah.
And then she's like, "Hi, I've had lots of alcohol. I am
I
unhinged."
am
And he's
so
like,
fun.
cool." As the story progresses, we learn that these quirks are actually veiled red flags of Clementine. So, what
Yes.
were seen as like her, fun dance in the rain times are actually like, wait a second, of course there's more. She's not just this one vision. Like she's not one-sided. We have depth to her, we have a history for her, we have things that she does. So in an article on flavorwire.com titled "Eternal Sunshine Destroyed the Manic Pixie Dream Girl Stereotype Before It Even Existed," writer Allison Herman explains the disillusionment of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl in the film, saying, "As we're taken through the lowlights of their relationship, the audience learns that the booze she pours into her coffee isn't an endearing quirk. It's a sign of the drinking problem that led her to total Joel's car. She's mercurial, irresponsible, and resentful of Joel to the point of being outright nasty. And of course, she's repeatedly described by herself and everyone around her as that term more associated with the Manic Pixie Dream Girl than perhaps any other, impulsive."
Mhm.
Um, which again is why she did the situation. She just gets in a car and drives off to who knows where. She just always needs activity, attention. Like if we're going manic, she definitely
She leans into the
was
manic of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope,
yes.
yeah.
Feeling a little maybe undiagnosed bipolar
Yeah.
or multiple person. Like there's a lot happening that she's not addressing. And instead she's trying to coat over with excitement and alcohol and other
Yeah.
ways of distracting herself from herself. Like that anxiety of like, I'm not doing the best with the time that I have has was quirky at first in this way of inviting him to start taking up more of his life, but then you're like, oh no, this is a literal anxiety that she has, and
All the
so
time, yeah.
she needs to make the voices quiet so she's very
Yeah.
loud, but even more damning is Clementine's own resistance to the Manic Pixie label, even before the label is named. So she explains to Joel in the beginning of their first relationship that she is aware of the image that she leaves and the expectations that others put on her. And she says, "Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm going to make them alive. But I'm just a effed up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours," which I really
Mhm.
appreciated. Like she, is both like aware of these things, but then also falling prey to it quite often.
Yeah.
Patrick is definitely doing this to her. Like he's
Yeah.
100% being that person. And while Joel is losing his grip on his memories, he remembers this conversation. And though then Joel works to dissuade Clem's fears, current Joel knows better, saying, "I still thought you would save me." So even though he was reassuring her at the time, like, "Oh no, it's not going to be like that. Like, I respect
Yeah.
you as your own human being." Inside, he knew he was actually really looking at her to do that. And losing that, like, understanding is one of the core problems because, like, without his memories, he wouldn't know that he had done that. So he's going to repeat that
Yeah.
whole thing, which is, I'll get there. But um, even in the midst of him erasing her, he relies on her, or at least his idea of Clementine. So I found that the version of Clementine that I liked seeing, the one that I felt like they made the most sense, like the only time I felt like they were actually good together was when it was the made up Clementine.
In his
That
mind,
was
yeah, that doesn't
his
exist.
version of her. It's like that
Yeah.
Rick and Morty episode, where they make like the ideal versions, or not the
Mhm.
ideal, but the versions of themselves, and then they put um they put the thing on her ideal version of the husband, and he
Mhm.
envisions this like ideal version of her because that's what she would have wanted. You
Mhm.
know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 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 it's when they go to couples therapy, and it's
Yeah.
like and the whole thing is that they're creating all these and then they make these monsters, and it's terrifying.
Yeah. And that's kind of what it is. Like he made this not a monster, but his ideal Clementine, and that's the best relationship he had. All the other
Mhm.
ones were like cute, sure, but I never felt like they really made sense. I was like, he's really boring and she clearly needs help. And I don't think they're doing that for each other.
Yeah.
Which is like, people are gonna people. But he when he made this version of herself, I was like, "This is the cutest that they've ever been," and it's literally his imagining of what she would do. So it's kind of like WWCD. What would
Mhm.
Clementine do? So he invents this version of her in his mind and enlists her to help to stop the erasure after experiencing those first moments of love once again. So he realizes he doesn't want to lose her. This is a bad mistake, and they're not listening up top. So he tries to stop the process in a different way.
Mhm.
Um, and he sees her as he had when they first began, and it inspires him to fight for her, for them, and what they had hoped to be. In an article on Cinephile Fix titled Film Analysis Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, they summarize the power of the imagined Clementine quite well, saying, when they challenge the erasing process by hiding in childhood remembrances and other off the map memories, the escape route is always suggested by Clementine. Joel would never arrive to such conclusions himself, but he subconsciously asks himself, what would Clementine do, and acts upon it. So when she whispers that final line inside his head, what he's really doing is implanting an impulse, something Lacuna can't touch, and something he wouldn't have done. Right?
Mhm.
Like he's like, Clementine, like she's always like, what if we do this? What if we go to your childhood? What if we go to a repressed memory? What if we go to an embarrassed memory? Um, and she's always, like, taking him. The baby Joel moments are kind of the best. She's like, "Baby Joel."
Yeah. Well, it's
Don't
also just,
cry.
like, very much he needs therapy to deal with the issues that he has with his mother, and that is not her problem to deal with.
Yeah, yeah, because he's like, "She won't hug
Um,
me. She won't pay
yeah,
attention to
clearly
me."
has, like, issues that he needs to work through. It's,
Yeah,
like, such a thing. I don't
yeah,
know.
and I think that's such an interesting thing for like, he wouldn't have ever thought to look there, right?
Mhm.
But
I
his
don't even know if he
Clementine would.
learned anything. So it's fine, it's fine.
But the procedure clearly isn't flawless and reveals that relationships leave something deep and ingrained within us, a mark that can't be erased. And we see this with the side plot of Kirsten Dunst's character, a young employee of the memory erasing agency Lacuna. And I've found a cool fact here that the term lacunar amnesia refers to the condition in which someone loses memory of a particular thing or event. So it's
Oh,
like,
fun.
that's probably where it came from.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Dunst, Mary has a girlish crush on her boss, Dr. Mearswiak,
Mhm.
and he is a man who's much older than her, and to her, like, charmingly wizened, right? Like, she quotes all these, like, authors, not very well, right? But when she's doing that to her current boyfriend, the Hulk, she is, telling him, and it just kind of goes over his head. Like,
Yeah.
he's not philosophical in that way. He's, technologically smart because he can, do this
Alter people's
equipment,
minds, yeah.
um, which is wild. But he's not satisfying that part of her that's like curious,
Mhm.
and attracted to intelligence. And when she starts, quoting those things, of course he knows. And so she's just like, she's in love with this like older man that's has this ideal, and in a desperate move she kisses him, and it's revealed to her that they've been here before,
Mhm.
um that they had previously been together, and she asked to have the procedure. I don't think that's what happens.
Yeah.
Later, Mary finds her own tape of her recorded interview before the procedure, and in a truly Hills Like White Elephants conversation, Mary explains how the affair started, and her voice is frail and uncertain as Dr. Mirziak coaxes her forward. And I say Hills Like White Elephants, I think, Joel, who loves people who read books, would appreciate the Hemingway reference,
Uh-huh.
um, in which it's a short story, and they're having a very plain conversation, but clearly what they're actually talking about is an abortion.
Mm.
And that's what it felt like. It felt
Got
like
you.
an older man coaxing his mistress to have an abortion.
Yeah.
What he's doing, like that's what it felt like, and it's like like two sentences, but you can see that she's like uncertain, and
Yeah.
she's still like in this fantasy element of their relationship, and he's like, no, you have to. You
Yeah.
wanted this, and later when she asked, like, did I look happy when you assumed I was together with him? She was.
Yeah.
So you know so then Mary then figures out that she had been happy at that time, and the idea of erasing someone from your life is cruel and unusual punishment, and so she mails everyone's tapes to them to reveal what they had lost.
Mhm.
um And we actually see throughout how the eraser has greatly impacted Clementine's already fragile mental state. The
Mhm.
missing moments and the holes left behind are nagging at her, and she's convinced something is wrong. And especially because we don't quite, or I don't remember how much time they said these two were together, but she is
Yeah.
definitely at this point in her life where she would have aged, like in a
I
way
think
that's
it was
very
2
visible.
years. Yeah, I think it was 2 years
Two
based on what
years.
they said, and that they had, like, lived together and, like, all because he said in his journal, Joel specifically, said
Hmm.
he had 2 years where he didn't write anything, and that's because all the pages were ripped out.
Oh, right, you're so right.
Yeah.
Still, that's like right? Like, you would
Yeah.
look in the mirror and you look different, and all of that time, like, you've lived together with this person, so much of your life was this person, you have lost 2 years of your life. So you're waking
Mhm.
up 2 years ago,
Yeah.
right? And now who is that? Like there's no way that your brain is like cool, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be that nagging, there's going to feel like there's these missing moments, the holes that are left behind, and they're nagging at her and she's convinced that something is wrong.
Yeah.
And our relationships, even the dark and harmful ones, are a part of us. They are growth in our journeys and we don't need them, but we have lived them. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that's really important because I remember a discourse online during Game of Thrones when Sansa had that really horrible arc that was just written in for stupid reasons in the show where she was being abused. And
Mm.
she had this whole conversation where she was like, it made me stronger. And everyone's like, no, no, that's not,
Yeah.
we're not doing that. And I completely agree. I don't think like people need to be abused and need to like some people need to forget, right? If
Yeah.
something terrible has happened to you, some that's how you protect yourself. Absolutely okay. But I do think like we have lived them, right? Like I don't think you deserve anything terrible to happen to you, but had those things happen to you, it is a part of what your life is. It is a part of who you are going to become. And sometimes we just have to reconcile that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that they're missing. And
Mhm.
if we could just erase those things, like who are we? If I didn't go through all the terrible things I went through in any of my bad relationships, I would not be who I am and would not have been the partner that I am to my partner. Like I wouldn't
Mhm.
be ready for what I'm about to
Yeah,
do, right?
there's a lot of
Like,
growth that happened in the middle space so that you are okay to
yeah.
be in this situation so you don't make the same mistakes.
I
Yeah.
would hate to be stuck in like this revolving door of like me still being the worst version of myself who allows myself to keep getting into these situations, right? Because there was a
Yeah.
certain person of me who would have found Joel's, right? Who would have been the manic pixie dream girl for these Joel's. And I would have just kept doing it if I didn't learn to not do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we see. Anyway, the beginning of the film finds Joel in an act of unlikely spontaneity where he ditches work and he runs off to the cold beach of Montauk. And this is because we learn later, he that was one of the little whisperings, right? So here he meets Clementine, not knowing this is a second first meeting, and they keep catching each other's eyes but never interacting until they're on their way home when Clem pounces on Joel, manically chatting away about hair dye color names. And Joel feels the soft pangs of interest, the desire and attraction still there, and they end
Yeah.
up in a new affair, discovering each other for this first time. Um, though the blissful beginnings is stopped short by the discovery of their tapes. And with them, they hear the worst of each other. They see what they had become and what they'll eventually believe of each other. And Clem again mentions her manic pixie dream girl worries, knowing he will get tired of her, knowing he'll say these terrible things about her. Like we didn't hear all
Yeah.
of her tape, but her tape was like, he's boring. I don't like what he made me become. Right?
Yeah.
Like he's just like he doesn't do it for me. I want fun. And then his is like absolutely destroying her whole entire character. And also like insinuates things about her that I never ever like every time he said it, I was like, what? Where are
Yeah,
you
I mean,
getting that?
they were together for 2 years, and it seemed like at no point in that entire time period did he actually even kind of get to know her. Like, maybe
Yeah.
her likes and jewelry, sure.
Yeah, yeah, he
Sure.
did. He did
On
figure
a
that out.
superficial, like, "Oh, I noticed her fashion
Mhm.
interests." Maybe. But, like, at no point did he ever actively or accurately interpret why she did things, who she was, or, like, any positive things about her other than,
Yeah.
like, she's fun, spontaneous and whatever. It's the whole time.
Yeah, I think the one time I would say where I felt like they were connected was when he called her Tangerine, and it's when she colored her hair into the Agent Orange, and they're like laughing, and it's very clear like he this is like a thing that they have, right?
Mhm.
And it's cute, it's playful, and he has this name for her, and it felt really authentic and nice for them. But I do agree, it felt like Kat and I both mentioned it. It felt a bit like this whole Miley Cyrus Liam Hemsworth situation, and Clem should have just been out buying her own flowers, okay?
Mhm.
Like, it's definitely him being like, "Could you just
Just
not be so
behave.
much." Yeah, just
Yeah,
behave.
for once.
Um,
Ugh,
I've been there. Um, you do.
I hate it
Uh,
so hard.
it's totally, right? And I think, yeah, I think they didn't really ever get to that point, so I totally agree. Um, but at the
Sorry.
end, Clem, after they hear these horrible things about each other and what they said about each other, so, like, you also have to understand, like, they're hearing themselves say that too, and that's really rough. Because
Mhm.
like, who hasn't said really horrible things about the person right after a breakup? Especially when you're in, like, that state where that person just forgot about you, you're gonna get angry. Some people get really vicious in that way.
Yeah.
And so they just have to see each other at their worst, and they just met. Right?
Yeah.
Like, right?
You
So
don't even have
this
any of the love armor yet, like,
shook,
it's
yeah.
literally
I don't know you, but you were saying stuff about,
yeah.
and so Clem mentions, I'm not gonna fix you. Like, I got my own stuff. She almost says it verbatim. Like, it's a
Yeah.
thing she has to say a lot, right? And Joel once again says he won't let that happen, and we're left wondering if he means it, or if in the end he'll find that he was once again still hoping she'd save him.
Mhm.
Because in the end, in their second first meeting, they were still very much the broken people they'd been at the start.
Yeah.
The revolving door, right? They are vulnerable and hurt, yearning for someone to fill the holes they feel inside. Only now they know that those holes are shaped like each other. And I read somewhere that a previous iteration of the script featured an older Clementine coming in for the procedure for the 15th time, showing that simply erasing someone isn't enough. Like, it just showed, like, it was a kind of a framing of it where here it is again, right? They just keep,
Mhm.
in this cycle of unhappiness, and never learning from their mistakes, or working on it in a healthy way. And I think I would have preferred that framing, to some degree. I think it totally works the way that it does, because it is kind of open ended, and you don't really know if them knowing how it ended is going to affect how it goes, right?
Yeah.
Like, if someone told me all the worst things about me, and without having to actively feel the harm that came with that before, um I don't know. Because they don't know what the argument was. They don't know what happened. They don't know that they were both the worst people in the world. They just know that they both thought that of each other.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that, uh, it would have been interesting to see the persistence and the doom of a flawed relationship, that simply knowing why something ended isn't enough to not have it end again, or that erasing the pain and darkness of a relationship won't doom you to repeat it. Um, I don't think we need bad things to happen to us, but bad things do happen to us. And when they do, we need to carry those memories with everything else, because it becomes a part of us and who we will be. And that Cinephile article sums up this feeling quite well, saying, letting go is one of the hardest things a person can do. It doesn't mean they're giving up, it means they're moving on. We hold on to things we value as if they will cease to exist when we let go. But the truth is, they won't. Letting go or giving up isn't an act of cowardice. Quite often, it's an act of supreme bravery. An eternal sunshine of the spotless mind tells us to accept things as they are and make the most of what we have when all hope is lost. And our ends are just as important as our beginnings.
Yeah. I don't know. Your whole thing made me realize the reason I maybe didn't like this movie as much as I didn't like it is because I just really disliked Joel. Um, and that's its own thing. I've met Joels.
Yeah,
I met many Joels.
yeah, yeah.
And they suck. It just
They
it's
do.
there's this like false thing where they like think they know a person and they just don't even just take the time or energy to actually get to know a person. So all their like little hot takes are just super unseasoned.
Yeah, well,
And
I
not
mean,
accurate most of the time. And yeah, they're just saying all the things like your insecure mind will say about yourself, but it doesn't make those things true.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
I
But
don't
I
know.
mean also like it is saying something that he's someone who's aware enough to ponder, right? Like he's aware that he's boring. He knows that, right? He knows he's missing something and he's talking about it. And I think
Yeah.
that's something. Like and that's I mean, it's not the last step, but it's certainly a first step. But I also think it's important like in disliking Joel to also dislike Clementine.
Oh, I
She
also
was
very
such a
much dislike
problem.
Clementine. I
She was an
disliked everyone in
entire
this
problem.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, she was an entire problem too. I just think that, yeah, oh, there's
I
something
get
they should have been
you're
together, and it
allowed, you're
makes me
allowed.
so mad, and it's fine.
And I think that's
Um,
totally valid because again, it's like I don't think and, whatever. I can imagine people who would get this procedure
oh,
were
for
it to
sure.
exist,
Yeah,
and if
young me even.
I would have been in it, I would have been I don't I have a very bad memory. It's almost like I have this procedure done to me all the time. People ask
Yeah,
me things constantly. They'll be like, "Do you remember that time?" Nope. Don't if you start a sentence with, "Do you remember?" The answer is no, I do not remember literally anything. I can tell you what I did yesterday.
yeah,
And don't take it personally, please. Like
yeah. No, it's like a real thing,
I
and
can't retain
our brains
memories.
will do that as a defense mechanism, which I'll get into a little bit, but it's like it is a really big thing where it's just like you see these 2 people who are very flawed, and they're making it each other's problems, and it's also just like young me, I understand, did not have the growth, you know?
Mhm.
Young me probably would have been like, "Heck yeah, you want me to forget?" And, like, little did they know it would go
I was
away
gonna
by
do
itself eventually
gonna
because
do
my
it
memory is
myself.
made of garbage. But, like, it's super real, and, like, you realize that even if you're not getting this procedure, you may cope with these things in different ways. So Clementine, before she gets this procedure, is actively coping with this with alcohol.
Mhm.
So like that was one of my coping mechanisms for a very long time as well. I think it's a very early 2000. It's still anytime you could be
Yeah.
coping with like toxic things that you shouldn't be coping with. But I just know that
Mhm.
like young me also used that as a coping mechanism, and it led me to places that were very unhealthy and did not encourage growth, but did make me
Mhm.
forget stuff. And that was kind of cool for a minute. But like, people are going to deal with things how they deal with them. And this was very realistic. Did I
Yeah.
think these characters were realistic? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But did I like them? No.
I don't think
Did I
you were
like
supposed to.
did I like their journey? Not really. I don't know if they really had a journey. Like,
That's yeah. Kinda, kinda.
kinda.
But they don't retain the journey. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Just someone
The
telling you
thing.
your
Yeah.
stuff doesn't mean you know it
Well,
now.
yeah, it's a very unique thing as a human person to learn from other people's mistakes. And when you separate yourself from your own mistakes, you don't learn from them because it is the same thing as witnessing someone else make that mistake and being like, I get it, but I want to see what happens when I do it. You know what I mean? Because that's
Yeah.
like a natural human thing to like not learn from other people's actions. You have to learn from yourself. People have to make their own mistakes. And when you separate yourself from your own mistakes, you just totally take away all the learning and growth that comes with it. So that's my little 2 cents. But I learned some science words as I tend to do on the show. And some of it's stuff I already knew, and some of it's stuff that's like, oh, that's kind of neat. And I already I wrote a little rant about why I didn't like this movie. Uh, but I don't know if I'm going to say the whole thing. I'm going to look through it real quick and see if we get there. So, like, I vaguely remember watching this in my early teen years, and I had like a positive view on it. I know people who like love this movie. There's so
Yeah.
many people who like vehemently think that this movie is the best thing, and it's okay, but I'm not one of those people, and that's fine. And it just hit really different in watching it this adult version. And also like I feel like if I watched it again, maybe I wouldn't as vehemently hate it. I think it's just more so I really just didn't like the characters, and I have a hard time enjoying media when I dislike the
Mhm.
characters. But it did do really cool things with its shots, and there's a lot. The
Yeah.
way they explored the brain was really neat,
It's
and
very
it was
cool.
it was objectively interesting. It was cool. It was creative. Uh, it was mostly the script that I did not care for, and Joel and Clementine I did not care for,
Yeah.
as well as Patrick, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, and as I said, it really just had like so many like unseasoned hot takes that just really were a reflection of the people who wrote it, and that's fine. We maybe aren't friends, and that's fine. There's not a single character that didn't suck, and it's fine. And I think that's mostly just because of where I am on my own healing journey, and because I
Mhm.
can't watch things without analyzing them. But yeah, just so much of this film was toxic. It's very much a Gen X love story, which is not a love story that I would like to partake in. Uh, but yeah, they shouldn't be
Talk about
together.
hot takes.
Uh, Most of the people who work there are predators and should be in jail.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yeah. One hundo.
And yeah, I don't know. I just feel like maybe, I don't know for sure. It just seemed like this movie gave a lot of people who like maybe would have had the logical take to be like, "Hey, we aren't right together. We want different things."
Mhm.
But would try again because they're like, "Well, love might be enough." And honestly, my hot take, the hill I will forever die on, is that there are reasons things happen and we should learn and listen from those things. And maybe that person who you don't get along with, do not have the same life goals, do not have the same aspirations, just do not
And
mesh
that's totally
with,
fine.
don't be with them, and that's okay because you experienced that, and now you can go find, now you know what you don't want. Listen to the part of your brain that says what you don't want and find something you do want.
Mhm.
Find something that makes you happy, because that's what I want for everybody. So yeah, I guess it's just more so that I just feel like it like reinforced things that don't help people grow, and that's fine. Is what it
Mhm.
is. But fun fact: breakups do actually mess with your brain in a pretty real way. I learned about that, and I also learned about that there's actual technology that could eventually be like fine tuned enough to make you forget things you don't want to remember. And I also found a fun article that said that if you forget things naturally, that just means you're smart
That's
because your
nice.
brain decides what's important information and what's not. And if you're taking in a lot of important information, it'll, you only have so much space in here. Your brain's only so big. So it'll throw things out that don't matter so that you have more space for the things that you deem to matter. So like where your keys or your phone are doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things when you're actively learning about, systemic oppression, Gabe.
Sure. I think my brain has its priorities all messed up. It
Yeah.
doesn't know what to keep.
But yeah, and it's also like object permanence and all this other stuff. It really, how you process information highly depends on how your brain operates and also how you process trauma. So it's a fun fact.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of Inside Out. How they
Yeah.
have that scene where they're like, "Oh, we don't need these memories," and they're like deleting them. And I
And
was
some of
like,
them are core memories when they
"Yeah."
like fall down the street.
I was like, my that section of my brain has the most employees, and they are just constantly just like delete, 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 delete. We don't need that. We don't need that. We don't. What we are running out of space. We only have two shelves of
Yeah.
of space we can keep. Everything is going in the trash.
Yeah. No, I mean, Gabe, you're preaching to the choir over here. I have an entire song blog of sad songs that every single one of them is, I can't remember people, and that makes me sad.
Yeah.
So I feel you. Um, but how do breakups impact your brain? That's what we're asking. I'm going to answer some of that for you. So, at the end of the day, trauma, as I said in many previous episodes, is highly subjective and entirely dependent upon the person experiencing something. A breakup can be traumatic to someone and is entirely dependent on who the people in the relationship are, how it ended, how invested both parties were, what were the, like, was it a sudden breakup? Was it over time? These kind of things. Were
Do
there
they have
signs?
children? You
Yeah, do
know.
they have children? Have they been married the majority of their life? There's like all the factors in their life really impact how it hits you afterwards. And if a relationship is toxic, abusive, or otherwise problematic, there's like an added factor that could make a separation both traumatic and life altering. It really kind of wraps around this whole thing where, like, when you are dating someone, depending on how long you are together, you're building a life with a person. You
Mhm.
integrate them into so many parts of your life. You create foundations, supports, routines, all centered around another human being, or at least like influenced by. And the process of dismantling and losing these pieces can entirely disrupt your life, which is inherently traumatic.
Mhm.
This disruption can be exacerbated depending on the way your brain works, specifically like the traumas you've experienced already in your life, the other relationships you have around you, including your friends and family, as well as
Mhm.
like, do you have ADHD? Do you have autism? Are you neurotypical? Like those things all kind of influence how our brain stores information and therefore how we process uh,
Mhm.
after events. And all these factors influence just how impactful a breakup can be. The loss of a partner through a breakup can be traumatic, and an article on the Insider titled, Breakups Can Impact You in More Ways Than You Think. Here's the science behind why they hurt so much by Sofia Mitrakostas. They say when you go through a breakup, especially one that's unexpected, your body may register it as an emergency and go into fight or flight mode. Being in this state triggers that release of hormones that can prepare your body to stay in that space and deal with a threat or run away to safety, according to Very Well Mind. It can also trigger rapid heartbeat, trembling, and other like physical responses.
Mhm.
Essentially, staying in a space of fight or flight is also a space that'll release toxic levels of cortisol. So, depending on how long you stay in that place,
Mhm.
can really impact your physical health. There's a lot of research around that specifically. We've talked about it before. I specifically remember our Turning Red episode where we talked
Mhm.
about like the adverse childhood experiences, as well as just like our ways that our brain will process cortisol and trauma, and how that can, if you stay in that space for too long, lead to long term health impacts.
Mhm.
So if interested in more information about that specifically, you can check out that episode. But when it comes to a breakup specifically, the article quotes licensed clinical psychologist Dr. Kristen Bianchi, stating that research has shown that regions of the brain that get activated in response to physical pain also get activated in response to a breakup. Whether we've broken a bone or gotten dumped, many of the same underlying neurological structures are involved. This translates to the conscious experience of being in pain. So like when you're really sad and you're lying on the floor and you're like, my heart hurts while you're
Mhm.
crying, it does.
It does.
It
You're
does hurt.
valid.
Your brain is like literally sending pain to that area of your body.
Oh.
And the article goes on to describe the ways in which a breakup can alter our brain chemistry. It goes like that deep. And that when someone goes through a breakup, they experience a drop in the production of the neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin that are associated with the feelings of pleasure and happiness. So they literally alter your ability to create those chemicals that you need to
Hmm.
feel happiness again.
I'm sending a
Um,
hug to all the people going through a breakup right now. Just
Yeah.
so you know.
No, it's real legit. And it's like you're not irrational or crazy. Like this is science that
Yeah.
supports the fact that this is actually deeply impactful. And it all kind of ties back to the fact that we don't view mental health on the same level as physical health within our society. We just there's not as much respect given to it, and that's like a problem because it's real.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
in another article from Big Think titled Using the Logic of Neuroscience to Heal from a Breakup by Jamie Bell, they go into detail on how our brains process love and process loss in a breakup. The feeling of being in love was known to light up the reward centers of our brain, releasing that dopamine, serotonin, and all those other feel good body chemicals that support positive things. And the loss of these feel good chemicals can experience a level of withdrawal similar to that of drug withdrawal and how it processed and like how it's processed in our brains. So they say
Mm.
when we are in love, our bodies are actively producing those feel good hormones and denying the release of negative hormones. And when the process suddenly stops, the withdrawal can feel extremely difficult to process, both from an emotional and physiological level. Along similar lines, the parts of the brain that process physical pain can also light up within the brains of those experiencing the emotional pain from a breakup. In an MRI images of people struggling with a recent heartbreak, the parts of the brain that lit up were some of the parts of the brain that are active when you experience physical pain.
Mm.
Um, so the solutions for dealing with these emotional responses are easier said than done, in that they require a lot of like intentional deprogramming. You really have to be self-aware to make these like conscious efforts. You know what I mean? It's something that you're going to really have to like actively pursue. Uh, and sometimes when you're really sad or do not have the dopamine or serotonin, that's hard to get to. So it's one of those things that is easier said than done. So It often includes avoiding those visual, auditory, and other sensory cues. So treating it like an addiction in a sense, avoiding the source.
Mhm.
And avoiding things that will activate that like craving for that person. So sensory indicators are like something very common in triggering trauma. So things that smell like things that remind
Mm.
you of them, things
Mhm.
that look like them, auditory cues, music, songs. Don't listen to those songs, you know?
That's why it messed up Clementine when Patrick was reusing all the things that Joel did or said, because it
Yeah,
was
that's why they
reminding
said
her.
remove those things from your house because it's gonna mess you up.
Yeah. It was reminding her
Exactly.
something is wrong.
Exactly. And you don't have the context. So you're like in that space, but like panicking because you don't know why
Yeah.
you're feeling
Oof,
all of this, like,
the poor
you
baby.
know? So yeah, these doctors should all be fired and arrested in that
Mhm.
movie.
Yeah.
Very, very
Yes.
strongly. But yeah, so they activate the parts of our brain. Anything that activates the part of our brain that stores memory and these sensory areas can trigger these feelings. So you want to avoid those. It also says seeking out like alternative ways to release positive chemicals within your brain, like endorphins. So seek out physical activity, go to the gym, punch things, run around, do
Mhm.
things that release those endorphins, eat foods that release endorphins, stuff like that. That can also help the process of moving forward. And according to Dr. Winch, one of the biggest hurdles to recalibrating your brain and adapting to life without your ex partner is that we don't find closure. That's another piece of it. Winch suggests that we try to accept the reason for the breakup or even find a reason. Maybe the relationship would not have worked out because you wanted different things in life or because they were not emotionally available for you. Finding logic and heartbreak can be a good start in the healing process. So, another thing that's kind of easier said than done, but you can kind of create these things for yourself. That's kind of like why you have the tapes where you're like saying all the reasons you don't want to be with that person.
Yeah.
Uh, you
Trust
need that
yourself.
information because you need to logic your way out of it. Because breakups sometimes can feel very illogical, especially when you're dating someone who may struggle in communicating and self awareness, or if you struggle with that yourself. Sometimes logic doesn't exist in breakups, so you have to create it.
Mhm.
And it can be especially challenging when breakups happen suddenly or without any like real conversation or
Mhm.
logical cause that really stands out. So, searching for logic, creating it out of thin air, whatever you need to do, can be helpful in finding closure and not going back to that person. So, trying to identify causes and reasons essentially will help. And then the last little piece of my section that I found interesting is, can people erase their memories? Apparently, like, yeah, like we're either there or we're close, you know?
Hell
Um,
yeah.
so apparently the science for memory removal is there and or at least on its way. There are methods that are like ways of tricking your brain into forgetting things or just having a more positive connotation.
Mhm.
Um, and there are ways memory erasure could be used to support mental health and equally ways it could damage mental health, as we kind of see in the movie. It's really one of those ethical questions that Jurassic Park, should we?
Mhm.
Because we
Not
can.
just yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not. I'm not a scientist that will create these things, so I don't know if I'm the one to speak on it. But it does seem we're kind of close to having the technology to do something somewhat similar to what was portrayed in Eternal Sunshine. In an article on SciTech Daily titled New Technique Can Help People Forget Certain Memories by the University of York, they go through where research currently stands on using sound specifically to suppress and enhance memory during sleep. So, similarly to how we saw Joel in the bed with the big helmet
Mhm.
while he's sleeping, there's ways that specifically if you're in your deepest part of sleep, which fun fact is a narcoleptic, I don't spend a lot of time in, so this procedure might not work on me anyway. But as a fun fact, when you're in the like deep sleep, so that part where you're like in your subconscious, essentially, that's where your brain is
Mhm.
processing the memories of the day that just happened, as well as like kind of all the little memories that live within your subconscious. There's a way that they've found to use sound and sound cues like through music and other things to kind of erase or like suppress rather, I think is what they're
Mhm.
kind of doing, those memories and the connotation surrounding them. So while they are currently in the experimental phase of this research, it seems their findings are promising in using cues and to alter memories through sound. In additional research, it seems there are a handful of ways to suppress memories, specifically in an article on frontiersin.org that is like a super sciencey title, but it seems like it's like an actual study. So, neural correlates of direct and indirect suppression of autobiographical memories by Saima Noreen, Akira O'Connor, and Malcolm MacLeod. They state research indicates that there are two possible mechanisms by which particular target memories can be intentionally forgotten. Direct suppression, which involves a suppression of the unwanted memory directly and is dependent on a fronto hippocampal modulatory process and memory substitution, which I've seen a few articles on now at this point, which includes directing one's attention to an alternate memory in order to prevent the unwanted memory from coming to mind. It involves engaging the caudal prefrontal cortex, and in the mid ventrolateral prefrontal cortex regions. So essentially a lot of the other things that I was able to find that are more about like that memory substitution is like if you have the sensory cues like their car, your
Mhm.
ex's car. You have a
Yeah.
very bad memory with this car because
Yeah.
it reminds you of your breakup. You see it and all you can think of is your breakup with your ex.
Mhm.
What they basically say is to look at the car and try to force your brain to think about a positive memory, even if it has nothing to do with that specific person. Maybe that
Mhm.
car took you to the beach. So
Mhm.
you're remembering how nice it was to go to the beach. So instead of thinking of the breakup and having it like as a trigger, now you're having this like visual cue to remember what a great time you had at the beach. And it's kind of like deprogramming your brain into having a positive context for the things that you're seeing, hearing, and otherwise. Something they've also said in like going through a breakup is you want to have a more recent memory from those spaces. So kind of like alternately to what the previous advice was, is actually like revisiting places that you went with that person so that you have a new memory associated with it and kind of forcing your brain to associate that memory with that space. So instead of thinking of your ex, you think of your friend that you went to get coffee with at the coffee shop where you had the meet cute with the guy that you broke up with or girl that you broke with or whoever you're breaking up with, you know?
Mhm.
So you're kind of like tricking your brain into having these new thoughts. And that's something that works. There's also ways to do it sensory wise with smell. It all kind of ties back to sensory because that's most of the ways in which cues are sent to our brain to activate, in PTSD and other trigger based mental things. It's all very sensory oriented. So if you can trick your brain into having a new context for that sensory response, you're kind of like forcing your brain out of that fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Do those things work? The research does seem to indicate that there are ways in which it works. It really depends on the person, just like anything else. Um, but there is a lot of research indicating that we're closer to something similar to Eternal Sunshine for the Spotless Mind. Maybe not exactly. I think from an ethical standpoint, there should be a lot of things in place, other methods. Like it should be in addition to therapy.
Mhm.
And there should be like a scale of what things you're trying to get rid of, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know. It shouldn't be as easily accessible as like I found like one of the articles where it was like the whole premise of this film was that it's as easily accessible as Botox. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's
Yeah.
as easily as plastic surgery, and that's why like they kind of set it up in the movie to kind of look like rundown plastic surgeon's office.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is like you're supposed to have this connotation that like the people going to this are looking for quick fixes,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
doctors doing it are doing it not to like help people.
Yeah.
That doctor was a predator, not a helping person.
Yeah.
They're not doing it to help people, they're doing it to get money at the end of the day. So you would want, in an ethical standpoint, you would hope that it would be done with actual wanting to help. It would be covered by insurance and
Mhm.
other things like that so that it doesn't become this money game where people are exploiting people who are in an emotional stress state for cash.
Something I was thinking about was there's like a song on TikTok that's going around, everyone loves "If We Ever Broke Up, I'd Never Be Sad." You know that one?
No, but it
It's
sounds nice.
it's pretty fun, but I'm like, whenever I hear it, I'm like, "Why are you with that person? If you're with someone that if you broke up, you're not sad." I feel like, at my age, I'm like, "That's a waste of time." Like,
Yeah.
I would be very, 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 very sad. Be
Yeah.
completely wrecked at this point in my life. So I was just like, no. And I'm also very sad. I'm a big sensitive baby. I'm always sad. Uh, so it is a very catchy. It's a fun song.
Yeah. Well, it's also like, what is your motivation behind a relationship? It's like those things are really important when you go into a relationship. So if someone's like
Mhm.
going into a relationship for fun, ideally they should be in a relationship with someone who's also going into a relationship for fun. So if they're going in a relationship not to be sad, then that other person in that relationship should have a clear conversation where they establish
Mhm.
we're going into this so that we're both not sad at the end, you know? It was a good time for both of us.
Yeah.
The problem is when the one
Communication.
person's like, when we break up, I'm not going to be sad. And then
Mhm.
the other person's like, I wanted to marry you,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So communicate in your relationships. That'll help you a long way. And if
Mhm.
it seems like it's not going to work out, like that's fine.
Mhm.
Let it not work out. Communicate. Set boundaries
Yeah.
in the beginning.
Yeah, and it's like I think one of the worst conversations that they had when they're like breaking up is when she like mentions she wants children, and he like makes this snide remark about how she would not be a good mom, and like
Yeah.
I kind of agree because she definitely had a lot of things she has to work on, but it's like
First.
it's something that he clearly was holding and thought and is feeling, and also doesn't feel safe to say that to her. So it comes out in this way, and then she reacts in the way that she does because she's defensive for it. And it was just like, that's something you've been holding. You know, like if you're holding
Yeah.
some dark stuff about your partner, you should go to therapy. You should talk this
Yeah.
out.
And also, it's like one of those things that doesn't have to be like a permanent state of being. He could have clearly said right now, and that would have had a different connotation
Than ever, you know, like
than
because that's what
ever.
it is, you
Yeah.
know.
Like you just accept that people never change or grow ever. Like that was the
hmm
theme of this movie.
Yeah,
No one ever grow. It's
yeah,
fine. But yeah, that was like a horrible part of it that was super sad, where it was like,
super heartbreaking,
because
and it
that's
just
clearly
like,
one of her insecurities. Otherwise, she wouldn't have reacted that way.
hmm
And he's like not communicating effectively or being honest about things either.
hmm
It's a
yeah.
fun time.
I will say I will never defend the show The Mindy Project, and probably I'm only one of the only few people who's ever finished it. But there is one scene in particular at the end of her and Danny's relationship. Spoilers for a show no one should watch. Where he essentially just like unloads on her, and he says all these things like, you know, you're irresponsible, you're this, you're that, you're that, like just forever, never seeing his own flaws. And she's just like, okay, yeah, I can admit that I got flaws. She's like, but I have always hoped that the person that I loved wouldn't just have a bag full of my negative pieces just ready at the ready to send at me. Like
Hmm.
at the very, and that was like like the only good line of her show, and then they completely ruined it because she ends up with him at the end anyway.
Yeah.
And he never apologizes for that. I want that out there. Trash show. Anyway,
Yeah.
but that one really hurt because I was just like, that is, it's so true. If you have all these things in your pocket that you could throw at your partner that are really insidious and horrible, that's time. It's time to evaluate. Do you even like
Yeah.
that person? Who
And
do
the
you
answer is
like?
no.
And
Yeah.
who do you like
Because,
instead?
yeah. Who you like is a version of them in your head that walks you through your childhood and helps you through all your problems in your mind that
hmm
doesn't actually exist in real life, and you shouldn't be with that person.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
That scene really made me sad, and the scene where he talks about how he left when they first met because he thought she was like crazy. And she's like, well, is it something I said? And he's like, yeah, you said it like, then go. So like vehemently. And she's like,
mhm.
oh, I'm sorry. And when she said that, I don't know why, it made me really sad.
Yeah.
Like, cause it was not her fault. Like, she clearly was not in a good place. And she's like, then go. Like, you clearly think I'm a weirdo. Um,
Mhm.
and he did. And it's kinda crazy that he even went to be with her, but yeah, just, like, be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, because you don't know, because we don't talk about things."
Yeah, and I think that if anything, that's like a really clear indicator that like throughout the movie, at the very beginning was when they stopped talking
Mhm,
about how like because he was assuming her intention the
mhm,
entire time and vice versa. Like they never actually had like why you say it like that kind of
Mhm.
conversation, which would have really helped. If they had that actual interaction where it's like, oh, I wasn't trying to hurt you in that moment. I wasn't
Mhm.
trying to
Yeah.
say it with that kind of like anger. And then they can both sit down in this beautiful time and explore why she said it that way. And then they'll
Yeah.
actually learn about each
And why he
other
took it that
and
way.
why he took it that way. And like maybe it ties back to the fact that his mom never hugged him as a child. And I'm sure it does. And there's just so much that they could have unpacked.
And they
But
can't
they
because they don't
didn't.
have those memories anymore. All
No.
they have is him saying, "She don't read books." Like, even in those tapes,
Mm,
he's not gonna he had that epiphany while it's being erased, so he didn't have that in the tapes. They don't
yeah.
know. They don't know that any of that, and no one else does, only they would, so it's sad. It's a flawed
Yeah.
film, just like people are flawed. I think it is very beautiful, and I think it's not flawed because it's not an answer. It's not supposed to
Yeah.
look like it's working. It's not supposed to look like this was the right thing to do. It's just a
Yeah.
human thing to do, and it's a human thing to happen and decisions to make because people are reckless like that, and we're here only as long as we're here. We make these decisions,
Yeah.
because everything feels so much bigger to us on this individual scale. So I think in that it is a great film. It
It
is
does.
a
It shows a very real relationship.
great.
It's very realistic, very true to what humanity is. It didn't try to sugarcoat anything.
No,
It didn't try to romanticize it until the end. To
I
me, the end they did, but it's fine.
I think it still like left it up. Like
Yeah.
we don't know. We don't know what they do. We don't know what happens to them next.
Yeah.
Um, we don't know if they ever, read, listen to the rest of the tapes. Who knows?
Yeah.
Or
I
what
hope they
happens to the
grow.
rest of people. Yeah, I
Yeah.
hope they go too. I hope if you are going through a breakup and you watch this film that it teaches you not to erase those things. I think watching it in a breakup would probably be a really different emotion.
Mhm.
I think it the Manic Pixie Dream Girl element is really great. It's refreshing to see someone flawed, and not and like for him to be like, "You right, you can't fix me. I'm messed up."
You can
Uh,
only fix you, and that's
and
okay.
that's all I should ever ask of you.
Mhm.
And yeah, now I'm thinking about it. I think it's a good movie, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this series,
Yeah, this is
Untainted
fun.
Love.
It's been
So,
interesting.
mhm. Next week we'll be talking about season 3 of You, and I can't wait to talk about Joe and Love. I get to play Love.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
I'm always playing her.
And they don't talk about things in a different way, because they talk about a lot of things, but it's in a very different way that the things that they don't talk about. They're very action based. They're
Yeah.
impulsive in a different kind of way.
I can't wait to talk about them. They're my
It's gonna
favorite.
be fun.
Season 3 is my favorite. It's so
Yeah,
fun. I can't wait.
I'm only on episode 1, so by the time we get to that episode, I'm very excited to see how far I get into this.
Yeah,
I have opinions about it.
it's gonna be fun. So I look
Mm,
forward to it. We're also gonna talk about friendship, relationships as well. And just like, people impact other people all the time. We mean a lot to each other, even if you don't want to
yeah,
admit it. We're not like humans are just made to be social, Happiness only real when shared. Chris
yeah.
McCandless, RIP. Uh,
Being a
so
person is hard, and when you
yeah.
don't under if you're neurospicy and you don't understand other people
Mhm.
all the time, that can be really hard too.
Yeah.
Good luck out there. Dating's hard. It's as what's the song? It's the season, the dating season. The
Uh,
SNL skit.
oh, it's
It's cuffing
yeah, it's
season.
cuffing season.
Yeah. So if you're
Pretty big
dating,
boy.
yeah,
Yeah. It's like when you get a puppy for Christmas, because you're like, or like a Valentine's Day, and it's like those are a commitment.
yeah,
Okay, it's a big deal. Same thing with person. Okay,
yeah. You
don't
gotta go
just because
into
it's
it.
cuffing season. Don't just grab big boy.
Yeah.
You should
Treat the
want
big
the
boy
boy boy.
nice. And yeah, you wanna know their heart too and their
Yeah,
minds. You wanna like all of it and you need to communicate.
yeah,
Everyone in your cuffing season, be honest about what you want out of the time.
yeah.
Don't be
That's
breaking hearts.
well. Don't get married.
Delete your kids.
They'll let your kids, or you they didn't want kids and you did, and you should have definitely talked about that before you got married.
Before they did that, yeah.
Big old conversation.